counted? How would you count those? Is there any aid there to help you?
Like the number of the verses?
Right.
Yeah, how did they show that?
How did they show that without? Yeah.
Here's one.
So after each verse, there was a
After
gold
each
circle.
ayah, there's a gold circle. But they don't count, interesting, they don't count the Bismillah's verse. There's the first verse. What else have they done to make this Quran and the script, particularly, beautiful, important? How have they made you know this is an important book? What has the calligrapher done to show it's important? Big. Big writing? What else is big? Decoration?
Means that
Oh, I keep.
offered.
Lots of space between the lines? That's wasted space. But it's showing you it's important. Yeah?
Right.
Vowels?
The vowels, exactly.
What have they done up here to the basmala? Exactly, they've stretched it out to say, hey guys, attention getting, this is the beginning of the text. This is the beginning of the surah. All these are clues to show you this is a really important manuscript. This is not one to be thrown around. This is important.
You can also tell from the color of the support, and granted these images are not as clear or perfect as they could be, but the one on the right, the Quran manuscript, is whiter than the one on the left. And the one on the right is still written on parchment, which is animal skin. And the one on the left is written on paper, and you can see there are faint little lines on the one on the left where the writing from the other side comes through, and that wouldn't have happened in parchment. So there were many, many things that we could have spent certainly a day, if not many days, looking at these things.
Maybe it is made for teaching.
It might be.
The objectives depend on the readership.
Right, that's
Maybe
true.
for learning,
Yes.
there are spaces and vowels.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely. And this is different. Later on, I'll show you another I found a picture of that blue manuscript. I found a picture of the blue manuscript, and and you'll see that it doesn't have any of these helpful markings. Is there? Okay. Another feature that, along with the arts of the book, would have been bookbinding, the covering of books, which is a whole art which people often pay very little attention to, but is very important, and particularly because here this is a manuscript that was made in Morocco, I think in the 13th, early 14th century, that has gold tooling on it. That is, the leather has been stamped with gold, which again appears earlier in Morocco than it does in, let's say, Italy. So this reflects a whole recent interest in the arts of the Mediterranean world, rather than the Islamic arts or the Christian arts, or that we're talking about ideas that move because merchants are coming back and forth and buying things. So there's lots. One, you might notice that this book is square. This is a particular shape of manuscripts in the Maghreb. And could you compare, let's say, the decoration on the book cover to things we've already seen?
The stars.
Right, exactly. So that these ideas, you have to try and figure out how is it that artisans got these ideas, and moved them from one medium to another. So there are lots of things to think about. Another subject we didn't talk about was ceramics. And all of you are familiar with the ceramics that you've seen, you see around, that I would say that in terms of the global history of ceramics in the lands of Islam, Moroccan ceramics are not among the highest quality. They're not the most interesting, but that doesn't mean they're not worth studying. But that that in the Central and Eastern Islamic lands, they developed much more complex ways of making the body, the clay, using ground stone and stuff, which allowed a sort of harder and finer finish, more like porcelain. But still, in Al-Andalus, they made these enormous, almost human-sized vases that are covered with luster, that is golden luster, that are some of the most extraordinary things, because you have to imagine they were fired in kilns that were, fueled with wood and olive pits and things like that. So it shows a tremendous amount of skill in skill in the technical manufacture of these objects. Another area which is probably most evanescent would be textiles. That I show you a piece of antique Fez embroidery, or this pilgrim banner, which you can see, and I made a detail of it. It's dated 1683, and you see it has calligraphy that then forms, we were talking about Dhul Fakar, the prophet's sword. So here is a representation of this double-bladed sword at the bottom that's actually made up of calligraphy. So you have all these arts going together. Why do you talk about textile? Why are so few textiles survive from hundreds of years ago? Well, why else?
Could they get dismantled in time?
Yeah. What happened? What are they used for? Textiles. They're used for they're used for furniture. Right. And what happens to clothing and furniture? Well, worn out. And you can't. It's difficult to recycle cloth. So very few survive. Some of them that survive because they were taken and given new context. That is, they were captured in a battle, let's say, with Christians, who then used it to wrap up their saints' bones or something like that. So you get these pieces of Islamic art that are used to wrap up Christian relics. Why should textiles be so important? Why would we want to study textiles if they don't survive that much? What role did they play in society?
To categorize people according to the social scale.
Yeah.
That's by what? What kind of textile?
Fancy ones would be worn by
Clothing.
rich and also important people in the society, like.
So what were textiles used for in daily life? Yeah.
To indicate the social position.
Yeah, but I mean, what functions did they? What functions?
You
How?
said clothing?
Clothing. What else? Furniture. Right. Exactly. Anything else? Decoration. Anything else? Could you make architecture out of textiles?
Yes.
Yes. What?
Yes.
What kind?
Carpets.
Carpets and
Tents.
tents.
Ah,
So, I mean, basically, textiles are in every facet of life. They hardly survive. They were made of what materials? I mean, what are the raw materials? Wool, cotton, silk.
Silk.
Okay, and how do you get them to be different colors?
dyeing.
Dyes,
with
dyes.
Natural,
okay,
natural.
right, and then you have to, you grow these fabric, there's linen, there's cotton, there's silk, there's wool. You have to you have to prepare the fibers, right? You have to weave them, to spin the yarn, weave them, and then sew them or do whatever. So it turns out, and there was a French historian, Maurice Lombard, who wrote about the world of textiles in Islam, and he compared them to the iron and steel industries of the Middle Ages. That is, they played an enormous role. If you read the documents about trading in the Middle Ages, most of it is about moving fibers, fabrics, dyes, the mordants, which are the chemicals that allow the dyes to work on the fabrics and stuff. So that really this is a world that is sort of functions basically around the textile trade. And certainly, yes, oh yes, and one of the, Sheila reminds me, one of the great scholars of Islamic art called it the draped universe of Islam.
Draped. Like
Draped, you know, like wrapped in fabric. And you know, you only have to think that the central shrine in Islam, of course, the Kaaba in Mecca, is covered in cloth. So it does show you that, and you could think, if you like, that many of these decorations that you see on buildings, tiles, the zalij, the carved plaster, are also a kind of representation of a textile pattern. Okay, enough on that. We could also talk about metalwork, but we didn't. We didn't talk about modern and contemporary art. And I show you two Moroccan artists, very different. Can anyone recognize either of them? Melehi, right? Yeah. On the left. And one of the most popular contemporary artists now on the right is Hassan Hajjaj in Marrakesh, who's made this hilarious movie about henna and the women in Marrakesh. Anyway, we also didn't talk about the art, the sort of non-urban art of the Berbers, Amazigh peoples. So, you know, there's a whole interest in the kasur, or in the textiles of Morocco. So, you know, I focused largely on urban art, so that's where we were. What here is just to give you an idea. This is that famous blue Quran manuscript, and you can see how distinctive it is, and basically how there are no markers to help in the reading. What does that tell you about the nature of the text and the nature of the people who read it? Scholars?
Scholars, what kind of scholars?
Right.
What kind of religious scholars? What did they know by heart?
They knew the Quran already by heart. And so this becomes just a memory aid for them. That when you look at it, and it's an object of prestige.
Left-hand page or right-hand page?
Is it a left-hand page or a right-hand page?
It's only one page, but you have to imagine it was part of a book.
It's left because the margin is over.
It's got a bigger margin. It's left. Yeah, but then you should see it in your mind if, yeah.
Okay, so what kinds of, what we use, I presented to you various things, but we used a certain methodology of art history, which was to start with the object, not with a theory or a text. So I didn't say, I want to prove this. I said, what does this tell me? And then you can apply it. I believe that all, you know, methodologies are appropriate to experiment with. But you shouldn't sort of like say, I'm going to do this kind of analysis or that kind of analysis. See what the object invites you to do. The first thing, I think, is to really look carefully. Observation. And, you know, our temptation is to say, oh, I get it. I look at it, I see it. But really, the longer you look, the more questions you ask, the better your answers are going to be. The object is a text, and it needs to be read. And that's one of the things one learns when one studies art history, is how to read. How to read not words, but images. And then, having done this, we try and put it in its historical context. If it has a date, that's very easy. You just slot it right in. But if it doesn't, how do you figure it out? You look for similar objects, you look for dated objects, you make a series, and then you say, where does it slot in? So you've got this description, this historical placing, but then the question is, how do you interpret it? And my own temptation is you should leave the interpretation for the end, for separate, because your observations are going to be always good. Your historical placement is always going to be good, we hope. But the interpretation, often these interpretations tell us much more about what we want to know rather than what it originally meant. So you can always sort of like play around with the last part and offer multiple interpretations. And those will probably change with time. One of the things that I think is important to look at is not only when an object was made, but what its afterlife was. And that is, what happened to it after it was made? How did it get to, why did it survive? Why did it come down to us? What does it mean today? So, one way of thinking about it is, how has buildings been restored? Why have they been restored? Why were they renewed? Why were they changed? Well, here we have two views of one mosque. Why did we talk about mosques? What was so important about them?
Because it's a focal, building.
It's a building, and why didn't we talk about houses across the centuries?
Because it's the common thing between all people from the same community, and we go to it 5 times per day.
Right.
It's a place where the decision can be made. It played a real role in the society.
Oh, yeah, but everybody has a house, yeah.
Yes, but I think also because mosques are more preserved than houses are.
Right, and why? Why were they more
Because of their religious representation.
religious significance, and they were used. They continued to be used. But why was this building preserved? This kubba that I showed you. What was it? Ablution, but the mosque was destroyed next to it or fell. But why was it preserved? By accident. It was forgotten. It was buried, and it was hidden almost entirely underground. So they're accidents. Why was the minbar preserved? It wasn't an accident.
Yeah, this was not an accident.
Because it was recycled and used.
It was recycled, it was taken from one mosque to another as a trophy, and it was considered beautiful and important. So it was venerated. Now here we have these ivory boxes which come from Al-Andalus. Why were they preserved? These were made to put jewels in and perfumes in and stuff like that. Totally secular objects. And you can see they have Arabic inscriptions around the covers. Why were they preserved?
Because they are unique and precious.
Yeah, but for whom?
The king.
No, actually, they were captured, and they became Christians. Thought these were so beautiful, and they didn't care that they had Arabic on them. And so they would take the bones of various saints and stick them in, or precious items and stuff like that, and stick them in and wrap them up in fancy cloth and put them in church treasuries, because the nature of the arts produced in this part of the world was so far superior that this was the fanciest thing that they could do. So we have this paradox. We have Islamic art, whatever that is, being preserved by Christians. They didn't care, in most cases, they didn't care about the Arabic inscriptions. They couldn't read them anyway, you know. And anyway, they were not religious. They were usually secular inscriptions of the names.
Sorry? Well, the same thing goes with the pink cloth.
Right.
There is the Arabic calligraphy, and there is the David star at the middle, in the middle of the... So there is this hybridity, if you can say.
Right. So one of the things I think is a really important point, and we talked about it a little bit, was the interconnectedness of these lands. That we saw that that some of the wood came from Southeast Asia or from India. The ivory came from sub-Saharan Africa. So there's a lot of trade. I talked today about textiles moving around across the silk and the spread of techniques and various kinds of agriculture crossing, because this was a world where there was one language, Arabic, and people, there's an old saying, you could write a check in Cordova and cash it in Samarkand. That there was a way that this was a commercial world. Another really important feature we mentioned very briefly was pilgrimage. That I don't know that anyone can figure out how many Muslims made the pilgrimage in the Middle Ages, but certainly some did. And as they did, it took years to do that. We know from those who wrote about it that it took years, and they didn't just go and come back, but they stopped along the way and learned things and came back and they saw things and they told people about what they had seen. So that's one way that artistic ideas did move back and forth. It's not only long distance, but we also saw very specifically with the minbar that it went from Cordova to Marrakesh. And we have to imagine that there was lots of cultural interaction between these cities. Once again, we think of Morocco and Spain as two very different countries, but in the Almoravid and Almohad periods, they didn't. They thought of them as two provinces of the same country. And that's really important. These were not different cultures. It was one culture to share. So a lot of people asked about how to find out more. So there are a zillion websites that you could check. But if you want the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York has a wonderful website, metmuseum.org. And that, don't bother with the whole rest of this, but if you go through there, search down in publications, you can find the entire PDF of the book on the minbar from the Qutbiyya Mosque, which you can download or you can read online. It's also on Google Books, I see. And they also have the catalog of the Great Exhibition of the Al-Andalus that, again, free download available. There's a wonderful cooperative website from many different museums in Morocco and Europe and North Africa called the Museum with No Frontiers. And they have a special section devoted to Islamic art with nice pictures and little captions with information about what the object is that are really very helpful. And for people who are interested in architecture, there's a very good program with a very complicated website, but it's gotten easier, I think, called ArchNet, or ArcNet, which is the Aga Khan program for Islamic art and architecture at MIT. And they have literally tens of thousands of photographs of buildings throughout the Muslim world, from Indonesia to the United States, that you can download for free and use to put together PowerPoints if you want. So that's that. And then finally, here we are. Oh, there we are. So if you have questions and stuff you want to follow up, we're happy to answer emails. I'm jonathan.bloom@bc.edu, and Sheila is sheila.blair@bc.edu. So I think we should open it up now to the group. Questions, comments? Yes.
Thank you again for this presentation.
Thanks again for this presentation. I just want to come back to the blue Quran, where there are no markings there. I think it's not a matter of the Quran was written in that way because the scholars, they knew by heart the Quran. Historically, the markings before in the beginning of writing of the Arabic scripts did not have any markings or the vowels, harakats. We did not have these before. I think this we refer this to sort of genius of the Arabs at that time. You know that in one symbol can be written in different ways. For example, al-ba, al-ta, al-ya, al-tha. It's one symbol, but just you need to put dots below, above, and then there is another word, another letter. So it is a kind of genius from the Arabs. It's not that they learned that. It's not only the Quran that was written without markings, but other things were written without markings. It was until Abu al-Aswad al-Lu'ati that the markings were put. So that was a long time after that. And Lu'adi was hesitant if to add the markings or not until he heard a Muslim reciting